begin our journey in a state of profound modern noise. Our attention is captured by fleeting crises, the breaking headline, the urgent notification, the scrolling feed of other people's manufactured successes and perfect failures. It feels ceaseless, doesn't it? A constant barrage of information that we are taught to interpret as demanding immediate emotional investment. We scroll through curated dramas, viewing the world not as a continuous flow of existence, but as a series of personalized catastrophes worthy of our deepest worry. This state of perpetual alarm is emotionally exhausting because we have internalized a fundamental error. We believe that external events hold intrinsic power over our inner equilibrium. We treat every headline, every social slight, every unexpected rejection as a personal affront, a verdict on who we are, or perhaps a sign that everything is about to fall apart. Our modern selves are masters of anxiety, constantly projecting the weight and consequence of outside forces onto our own fragile psyches. The ancient philosopher observed something profoundly simple, yet utterly revolutionary. Most of what we obsess over, the very things that dictate the rhythm of our worry, exist entirely outside the sphere of our personal agency. We waste immense psychic energy worrying about the politics of distant lands, the ephemeral opinions of strangers online, or the fluctuating market value of goods that have nothing to do with our character or our virtue. The problem is not merely having worries. The deeper philosophical trap lies in mistaking those external trifles for things we should be worried about. We assign them emotional gravity, a weight of importance that makes us feel powerless, constantly reacting to forces beyond our reach. Our lives become a reactionary cycle. Something happens outside us. We react with fear or anger inside, and this pattern ensures we remain perpetually exhausted, emotionally depleted by the endless demands of an uncontrollable world. Imagine the vast river of life flowing past. Some elements are sediment, the unexpected failure, the harsh word, the systemic downturn. They happen. We can observe them. But our natural human inclination is not to merely observe, it is to become swept away. We mistake the current for the self. We believe that if we only manage enough emotional energy against these external flows, we might somehow redirect the whole river of existence in favor of comfort and approval. This belief system, this devotion to controlling the uncontrollable, is perhaps the most subtle and damaging illusion our culture has perpetuated. It promises control through effort, but delivers only fatigue. It insists that happiness is contingent upon a specific set of favorable external conditions: professional success, relational approval, or a perfect headline. When those conditions inevitably fail to materialize, we collapse, feeling not just disappointment, but fundamental failure of self. The Stoic diagnosis was radical in its simplicity. They observed the gap between what happened and how we chose to judge what happened. taught us that while events, the headlines, the setbacks, the unexpected bills are truly indifferent to us, our asterisk judgments asterisk about those events are where all the emotional suffering originates. We are so accustomed to living in a world of immediate stimulus response that the space between the two feels utterly non-existent. The news flashes, we feel panic. A person criticizes us, we feel shame. We run, jump, react, but within that fleeting moment, the instant between the sound hitting our ear and the corresponding knot of anxiety tightening in our chest, lies an unassailable point of power. This tiny pivot point is where freedom resides. The great struggle, therefore, is learning to detach our internal narrative from the external spectacle. It means consciously retraining ourselves to recognize that a broken headline, while disruptive and annoying, holds no inherent power over our capacity for reason or kindness. The criticism of a stranger, while stinging, simply reflects their own inner turbulence, not the absolute truth of your worth. This chapter is an invitation to stop treating the headlines as personal indictments. It is a call to observe what happens when we cease fighting battles that were never ours to fight and accept instead the immense quiet dignity found in recognizing the boundary, the critical line between what belongs to us, our will, our judgments, our reactions, and everything else. The exhaustion begins when we confuse external reality with internal truth. The path toward resilience does not involve building thicker emotional shields against the world. It involves refining the judgment itself, creating a foundational certainty that no outside event can ever dismantle. We have spent time acknowledging the overwhelming tide of things that rage around us, the headlines, the social media feeds, the judgments passed by strangers. We recognized in the first chapter how easily we mistake these relentless external currents for personal failings or even moral indictment. Our emotional lives become captives, constantly reacting to a world that demands our attention and our approval. But the philosopher asks us to ask a deeper question. Are we truly responsible for everything that happens asterisk to asterisk us? And more importantly, where does our true power reside? The ancient teachings, particularly those of Epictetus, give us a radical pivot point. They introduce a distinction so fundamental, so simple in theory, yet staggeringly difficult to execute. The separation between what is up to us and what is not. Think for a moment about that frantic feeling when you are arguing with someone over something trivial, a misunderstanding of facts, an opposing view on taste or politics. Your heart races. You feel defensive, exposed, believing that if you just argue harder, if you just prove your point sufficiently, the discomfort will cease. You believe control lies in winning the argument. But what happens after the fight? Does victory guarantee peace? Often, no. The emotional exhaustion lingers long after the dust settles, leaving a hollow ache of unfulfilled necessity. It seems we mistake external validation for internal peace. The Stoic discipline gently whispers a correction to this deeply held error. Your power is not in outcomes. It is not in facts that others disseminate or beliefs you cannot shake from someone else's mind. The moment when the fight begins, your attention drifts immediately outward, seeking confirmation of fault in another person's judgment. The philosophy demands that we pull our gaze inward to the fortress of the self. We must learn to recognize the boundary line, the threshold separating the mutable chaos of external events from the unshakable ground of our own mind. This distinction is not merely academic. It is a practical shield against emotional tyranny. Consider a person who has critically assessed your work, a critique that feels sharp and deeply wounding. Your natural inclination is to internalize this judgment, to believe that their words reflect an absolute truth about your competence or your inherent value. You feel the sting of personal rejection. The pain arrives with such weight, it threatens to derail everything. But here is where the dichotomy takes hold. That critical assessment, the words themselves, is external. It belongs to them. Their judgment springs from their own history, their own biases, and their own limited perspective. You can observe those words like a surgeon examining tissue under glass. They are just ink on paper, or sounds vibrating in the air. However, your reaction is internal. The act of interpreting that critique as a verdict on my worth or proof that I have failed, that interpretation belongs solely to you. It is housed entirely within the citadel of your mind. This inner narrative, this judgment, is the only thing truly up to you. It is the single point of leverage in any difficult situation. The core struggle we face every day is thus revealed. We treat our judgments as if they were objective facts, and when those facts challenge us, we feel destabilized. We mistake emotional reaction for accurate information. Epictetus teaches that while the event, the criticism, the loss, the unexpected disappointment is merely an occurrence in time, your judgment about that event is a choice of meaning. You can choose to interpret it as a catastrophe, a failure of character, and therefore suffer profound despair. Or you can choose to interpret it simply as data, a piece of information indicating where effort or perspective needs adjustment. The disciplined mind practices a kind of psychological withdrawal. When the external opinions of others, the social media shaming, the boss's disappointed gaze, the friend's casual dismissal begin to assault your sense of self, you must perform this intellectual sleight of hand. Observe the judgment without owning it. You are not responsible for the accuracy or kindness of the world. You are only responsible for the integrity of your inner assent. This realization is profoundly liberating because it redirects all available energy away from futile defense and toward internal fortification. We must consciously train ourselves to treat external opinions as simply that, opinions, passageways of temporary mental activity belonging to others. They possess no inherent power over your sense of self, only the power you grant them by giving them your agreement. To withhold that assent is to become emotionally sovereign. The battleground is not in the world. It is between your immediate emotional reaction and your disciplined reason. The luxury we must demand of ourselves is the pause, the critical space between the stimulus and the response. In that gap, we find the locus of freedom. It demands patience, a tireless scrutiny of our own inner monologue, recognizing the difference between fleeting noise and sustainable self-governance. This process of discerning power is humbling. It suggests that much of the anxiety we carry, the dread of judgment, the fear of disagreement, the obsessive concern with external approval, is simply built upon faulty architectural assumptions about where our authority actually lies. We have spent time examining where our power truly resides, separating the events that belong to others from the judgments that are solely ours. We learned that our freedom is not found in altering the world around us, the opinions of others, the unpredictable shifts of fortune, or the inescapable demands of modern life. Rather, it is rooted in the sovereign space between a stimulus and our response. But there is still a profound misunderstanding surrounding this freedom, particularly concerning what we call indifference. The modern ear often hears indifference and conjures an image of numbness, a state of emotional vacancy, or even apathy. It suggests that to be free according to Stoic principles, one must simply cease caring entirely. This is the conceptual trap we must avoid. True Stoic resilience is nothing like that brittle emptiness. If you feel numb, it is because you have stopped fighting. But if you are truly resilient, it is because your inner core has become impervious, not by giving up love or passion, but by building an armor of wisdom and disciplined acceptance. Apatheia, the word often misrepresented as simple apathy, translates more accurately to a state of emotional tranquility. It is not the absence of feeling, rather, it is the mastery over destructive emotion. It is the steady, clear-headed recognition that while we are bound to feel, those feelings must be understood and processed through reason before they gain the power to dictate our actions or shatter our peace. The path toward this tranquil state demands a profound shift in perspective. We must stop reacting to life as if every external challenge were an absolute tragedy, an event signifying personal catastrophe. Instead, we learn to view such occurrences as merely raw data points, facts that have happened, which then allow us the freedom to decide what meaning we assign to them. Consider the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. They are simply events. They are external happenings, a sudden rejection, a career setback, a harsh critique from a friend. These things do not inherently contain value. They only acquire emotional weight through our judgments. Our panic, our intense self-pity, our overwhelming resentment, these powerful emotions are not caused by the event itself, but by the story we tell ourselves about that event. The student of Stoicism learns to interrogate this internal narrative. When faced with disappointment, for example, the untrained mind leaps immediately to judgment. I failed. I am inadequate. This judgment is what hurts. The failure itself is merely an outcome. By catching that immediate judgment, by pausing and asking, is this true? Does this statement describe the event? Or does it describe my fear of the event? We create space. That space is where our power resides. The goal is not to eliminate feeling, for pain and joy are inherent parts of the human condition, and denying them is denying ourselves. The goal is merely to refuse allowing those feelings, especially the catastrophic ones, to form an involuntary emotional habit, a cycle that drags us away from reason and into reactive panic. It is about building an internal fortress strong enough that, when the inevitable chaos storms against it, all it hears is the steady, unshakable rhythm of reason. We have spent time learning to draw a clear line in the sand. We learned that much of our suffering is not caused by what happens asterisk to asterisk us, but by the internal story we tell ourselves about what happens. But understanding this concept intellectually, knowing that your inner judgment holds all the power, is immensely different from living it. It is an act that requires constant, wearying effort, like retraining a muscle we have neglected for decades. The philosophy doesn't offer us a shield against hardship. It offers us perspective on our own strength in the face of hardship. We must confront the deepest anxieties we carry: fear of failure, fear of rejection, and the suffocating weight of external judgment. These are the gravitational pulls of modern life, pulling us toward endless comparison and obsessive striving. Consider the nature of criticism itself. It is a torrent, a disorganized, often emotionally charged deluge, originating entirely outside your person. When we receive critical feedback, whether it comes from an online forum, a superior at work, or even a loved one who simply misunderstands our intentions, we have a powerful tendency to internalize it. We do not hear merely words, we hear verdicts. We feel that the criticism is a definitive statement about our intrinsic worthiness, as if they are peeling back layers of our being and declaring us lacking. This assumption that external critique equals personal defect is perhaps the most damaging lie modern society tells us. It traps us in what I call the failure loop, an emotional spiral where every setback is interpreted not as data or information, but as proof that we fundamentally lack something essential for happiness or success. The Stoic challenge here is brutal yet profoundly liberating. You must refuse to grant those external judgments such authority over your self-concept. The criticism does not define the whole of who you are. It illuminates only one specific facet of a single moment in time, and even that facet can be viewed with detachment. Think about professional life for a moment. because failure is perhaps most concentrated and painful there. We invest years, parts of our very identity, into careers, goals, and the narratives of competence. When those external structures falter, when we lose a job, fail an exam, or see a project fall apart spectacularly, the ensuing emotional agony often feels existential. It feels as though we have failed. It is a conflation so profound that it obscures our ability to process the event rationally. The goal of this chapter is not simply resilience. It is clarity. It is learning to separate the objective reality of an outcome, the fact that the plan changed, or the funding was cut, or the relationship ended, from the subjective judgment we attach to that outcome. That means we are worthless, incapable, or fundamentally flawed. The ancient wisdom demands a cognitive shift, treating failure not as a moral indictment, but as data. An event is simply information. It tells us something about the environment, about our current skill set, or about misaligned expectations. Nothing more dramatic than that. The outcome is neutral. Our judgment upon it, the story we spin around that neutral occurrence, is where all the pain lies. This takes practice of immense patience. When you encounter a piece of criticism, especially one delivered with venom or dismissiveness, I invite you to perform an immediate internal pause. Do not defend yourself emotionally. Do not launch into explaining your intentions. Instead, ask 3 cold questions. First, is this statement about my objective worthiness, or is it merely an observation of behavior in a specific context? The answer will almost always point toward the latter. Second, does this judgment require me to sacrifice my peace for its validation? If yes, you have found your internal battleground. Walking away from that fight, refusing to validate their negativity with your tears or defensiveness, is the truest victory of inner sovereignty. Third, what is the lesson here, stripped entirely of emotion? Not what did they say about me, but what can this event teach me about my process, my preparation, or my emotional response to chaos? The failure loop thrives on emotional identification. It wants you to believe that when your external world cracks, your internal self must follow suit. But the Stoic path asserts the contrary. The external world is inherently unpredictable and chaotic. Our inner judgments, however, are sovereign territory. If you treat setbacks as unavoidable information points, as negative feedback rather than ultimate verdicts on your soul, you neutralize their power. You refuse to grant them the status of defining trauma. This realization does not eliminate disappointment, but it changes its shape, making it manageable, finite, and survivable. It grounds you back into the steady rhythm of self-recollection. What do I actually control right now? Only my next thought, only my assent to the story being told in this moment. To accept that boundary is not giving up. It is embracing a monumental freedom. Most of our suffering does not happen when the storm hits. It happens in the quiet moment before we choose how to react to it. We are masters of anticipation, yet terrible at inhabiting the now. Our minds are sophisticated machines for time travel, constantly projecting ourselves into anxieties about a future that may never arrive, or endlessly excavating the rubble of a past that cannot be rebuilt. This constant mental whiplash is perhaps the greatest drain on the human spirit. The Stoics understood this fundamental flaw in our attention, the compulsion to live always in relation to something else. Some headline, some opinion, some anticipated loss. They teach us that true freedom begins not with grand gestures of defiance, but with a radical disciplining of where we choose to place our focus. The arena of the mind, as Epictetus taught, is immensely powerful. It is here that we can decide what deserves our precious attention and where we must withdraw it entirely. To be distracted is simply to allow your inner gaze to wander away from the immediate reality, to drift into hypothetical scenarios or past grievances. Disciplining attention is not merely a self-help technique. It is a philosophical muscle, requiring us to anchor ourselves firmly in the space of pure present tense. It is in this singular moment that all genuine agency resides. The greatest enemy of the anchored mind is distraction itself. In our modern existence, the environment is designed for dispersion, the constant pinging of notifications, the unending scroll, the sheer volume of information demanding immediate emotional assessment. We are treated like receptacles waiting to be filled with external urgency. Our attention becomes scattered, shallow, and exhausting. But if we understand that consciousness itself is our primary resource, then reclaiming focused attention becomes the highest act of self-governance. Consider the process of observation. If you commit fully to merely observing your immediate surroundings, the feel of the ground beneath your feet, the steady rhythm of your breath entering and leaving your body, you are performing a profound philosophical exercise. You are training yourself to recognize the boundary between being an active participant in chaos and simply being the conscious witness to it. This distinction is everything. When we anchor ourselves to the now, we observe that many of our most intense emotional reactions are entirely dependent on narratives built upon time, on if or when. They rely on a perceived disconnect from reality. The past holds seductive power, doesn't it? It allows us to construct elaborate moral identities, who we were, the failures we suffered, the people who hurt us. We endlessly revisit these memories, not necessarily to learn, but because reliving them gives the feeling of engagement, a deceptive form of control. But that is a haunting cycle, for the past cannot be changed. It only exists in our recollection. To dwell there is simply to lose the present moment's light. The future, conversely, is ruled by potent, insidious anxiety. It compels us toward planning, striving, and preemptive suffering. We build elaborate contingency plans for catastrophic failure, sacrificing peace today for a perceived security tomorrow. Yet, life remains frustratingly unpredictable. By spending our emotional currency on hypothetical outcomes, we deplete our reserves of equanimity. As the Stoics suggested, while prudent planning has its place, anxiety is simply poor planning dressed up in dramatic robes. Therefore, the present moment becomes our sanctuary, our anchoring point. It is neutral. It does not judge. It simply is asterisk. To train attention here means practicing non-judgmental receipt. It means acknowledging a thought as merely a passing neural event, like watching a cloud drift across a clear sky, rather than accepting it as an unassailable truth about your character or the world. When the mind pulls you into worry over tomorrow's meeting, gently bring it back to the texture of the chair you are sitting on. When the memory of yesterday's sharp words attempts to wound you again, breathe and recognize that sensation only exists in the architecture of your recollection. This constant, mindful redirection from external narrative to internal stability is how we begin the art of emotional resilience. It is a quiet revolution waged against the tyranny of mental projection. We learn that true power does not come from changing big, uncontrollable events, but from radically managing the small space between the stimulus and your conscious response. The practice is simple, yet profoundly difficult. When you feel the familiar pull toward worry about an external injustice or a regret over a missed opportunity, pause, take a full breath, and ask yourself, not with effortful reasoning, but with simple noticing, am I experiencing this pain right now? Or am I merely remembering when this pain happened? This subtle shift of perspective is the pivot point. It allows you to detach from the narrative and anchor back into the present physical reality. By continually bringing your awareness home to the breath, to the single sensory experience unfolding before you, you dismantle the power that future dread and past regret have been hoarding over your peace. You begin to live truly in the mastery of now. We have spent these previous chapters mapping the landscape of our inner selves, discovering that the true battles are not fought in the public square or on the digital screen, but within the silent chambers of our own judgment. We learned that much of the anxiety we carry is simply a failure to distinguish between what belongs to us, the internal sovereignty of our assent and reaction, and what belongs to others, their opinions, the whims of fate, the unpredictable nature of men. This recognition, however profound, does not eliminate suffering. In fact, it merely gives names to its mechanisms. The Stoics offered a potent antidote to this relentless anticipation of pain. It is known as Premeditatio Malorum, or the premeditation of evils. To prepare oneself mentally for the storm before the first drop falls. This practice does not suggest that we should become morbid or despairing. Rather, it is an act of radical emotional preparation a strategic surrender to potential discomfort in order to reclaim our present peace. It asks us to take on the role of philosophers and future selves combined. Imagine for a moment, without flinching, imagining worst-case scenarios. Not in a theatrical sense, the sudden car accident or the irreversible illness, but the deep emotional ramifications. Professional failure, public humiliation, the loss of dearly held material possessions. Why do we often treat these potential losses as devastating shocks? Because our imaginations have built them into monoliths of dread. They hold an impossible power over us. We anticipate not merely the event, but the emotional force of that imagined blow. The Premeditatio Malorum instructs us to confront this emotional gravity head-on. We are asked to sit down, perhaps in quiet contemplation, and systematically strip these feared outcomes of their catastrophic sheen. If we contemplate losing our job, for example, what truly happens? The external fact is a period of financial instability. Yes, but the subsequent terror, the belief that this means we are worthless, or unlovable, or incapable, that feeling is merely a judgment we have constructed and allowed to take root. The power lies in repeatedly performing this mental rehearsal. We rehearse not how to survive the loss itself, but how to receive the news without collapsing into self-judgment. To treat the potential failure as simply data, a temporary, predictable disruption that demands adaptation, not an existential verdict on our soul. By acknowledging it now, before the stressor arrives, we deflate its shock value. We remove the element of surprise, and in philosophy, surprises are where most human suffering resides. This is essentially the inoculation against emotional vulnerability. If you know the bitter taste of the medicine coming, the sheer dread of taking it loses some of its power. You prepare your constitution, mentally speaking. The goal is to reach a point where the actual event does not carry the weight of our collective fictionalized terror. When the loss occurs, we react with sober assessment rather than panicked shock. Consider the anxiety that grips us before major life decisions, a difficult conversation, a high-stakes pitch, an emotionally charged confrontation. The anxiety is rarely about the external difficulty. It is about our subjective belief regarding the asterisk consequences asterisk of that difficulty. We judge potential failure as catastrophic, and this inflated judgment is what exhausts us. The Premeditatio Malorum forces us to apply emotional logic. It asks, if I were to genuinely lose everything tomorrow, my reputation, my savings, the comfort of routine, what single internal resource would remain untouched? The capacity to reason, the choice to interpret, the ability to begin again. We are training ourselves for psychological indestructibility. This mental discipline is not fatalism. It is grounded realism mixed with radical self-trust. It teaches us that our emotional stability does not depend on maintaining perfect circumstances. but on retaining the internal freedom to assent only to what is rational and virtuous in any circumstance. We are building emotional musculature, brick by conscious thought. Each imagined loss we process demystifies the pain, transforming it from an overwhelming threat into a manageable challenge. It grounds us in the sober truth. While we cannot command the winds, we can absolutely command our response to them. The disciplined mind, having practiced this mental forethought, becomes resilient. It does not simply wait out the storm. It meets it with prepared awareness and quiet capability. It understands that life is a stream of unknowns, and therefore, preparation must be constant, a vigilance over one's own judgments, anticipating both triumph and tragedy with equal measure of calm acceptance. This preparatory work transforms us from reactive passengers into deliberate navigators of our own lives. We have walked through the noise of external expectation and the relentless current of other people's opinions. We have learned that much of our suffering is not caused by the storm itself, but by the judgments we assign to that storm, that it means danger or failure or insult. The trouble with anxiety, the nature of which is rooted in assuming control over the uncontrollable, is that it forces us into a constant cycle of reaction. We react to the headline. We react to the critical email. We react to the subtle rejection in a conversation we desperately hoped would be affirming. But here lies the core pivot point, the moment where philosophy moves from abstract theory to radical action. Our entire capacity for freedom hinges upon understanding the profound and simple division between what happens asterisk to asterisk us and how we decide to interpret what happens asterisk to asterisk us. The event, the argument in the office, the poor performance review, the sudden cancellation of plans is merely an external fact. It arrives like a rock against the shore. It is raw, unadorned reality. It possesses no inherent moral weight. It simply exists. Yet, what happens immediately after the rock hits us? A wave of feeling, a surge of self-judgment. We begin to narrate the event. We tell ourselves, I failed. They judged me. This means I am inadequate. This narration, this internal commentary, this is where our sovereignty resides. It is not in choosing whether the rock hits the shore. That force is external and beyond our command. Our power is only in standing at the threshold of interpretation, pausing just long enough between the stimulus and the response to choose a different narrative. Think of it as a small gap, a tiny sliver of space, barely visible, situated entirely within you. This void of choice is your true locus of control. Every suffering moment, every bout of worry about tomorrow or regret for yesterday passes through this gateway. If we remain habituated to rushing through the gate, letting anxiety and knee-jerk defense mechanisms dictate our response, then we are slaves to reaction. But if we pause, if we train ourselves to notice that space, that instantaneous silence before the internal condemnation begins, we perform a profound act of philosophical defiance. We refuse to assent immediately to the unfavorable interpretation. The event is simply a happened. Our judgment turns it into a happened, and therefore I am flawed/unsafe/unloved. The separation between these two concepts is monumental. It is the pivot point. We are taught by the Stoics to view our internal judgments as hypotheses, mere guesses we have prematurely accepted as undeniable truth. When criticism arrives, do not treat it like a verdict on your soul. Treat it instead like data, an observation about one specific interaction, nothing more. The comment is directed at the action. The judgment must be applied only to the action, never expanded to encompass the totality of your worth. Consider this process as mental muscle training. When something inevitably painful occurs, the unexpected rejection, the public mistake, your initial reaction will be visceral. Defensiveness, shame, anger, that is old wiring, a habit built over years of emotional fragility. The practice is not to eliminate the feeling, but to identify its source. Is this pain truly generated by the external event, or is it generated by your immediate, dramatic narrative about that event? The simple act of asking, "Is this judgment useful?" can dismantle the edifice of unnecessary suffering. Does my belief that I should have done better improve the situation now, or does dwelling in shame simply perpetuate the cycle of anxiety and paralysis? This separation is an ongoing discipline. It requires us to become masterful observers of our own minds, a kind of internal diagnostician, charting the geography of our emotional responses. We must learn that while we cannot control traffic patterns, we can control whether we curse every delay as a catastrophe or accept it with measured patience. We reclaim our humanity not by changing the world around us, but by mastering the minuscule space within ourselves, the moment between sensing and understanding. That tiny pivot point of choice is where all genuine freedom resides. It is the doorway from reactive existence to contemplative mastery. We have traced a path through the noise of modern anxiety, learning that much of our suffering is not born from the events themselves, but from the fierce judgments we overlay upon them. We have learned that true power resides in the quiet space between stimulus and response, that tiny pivot point where our will intersects with fate. But this knowledge comes at a cost. It demands an immense withdrawal, a systematic letting go of what feels fundamentally necessary to us, yet ultimately remains outside our grasp. If we are to live free from the emotional tyranny of external opinion, we must learn the great, difficult discipline of indifference. Do not mistake this word for apathy. Apathy is a deadening. It is the inability or unwillingness to care. What the Stoics understood and what we seek to cultivate is something far more robust, a sophisticated mastery over our emotional investment. It is a deep, deliberate freedom from needless concern, the virtue of indifference, or Apatheia, is not about becoming emotionally void. It is about reallocating energy. Imagine your attention, your precious life force, the sinew connecting thought to action, as a finite reservoir. Every fleeting anxiety about a social media post, every lingering grievance over a conversation that cannot be undone, every desperate effort to please an indifferent colleague or family member drains this water without replenishing it. We are constantly wasting energy fighting battles that do not belong to us. The fundamental shift required is realizing where the boundaries of your responsibility truly lie. You are not responsible for the weather, nor the political outcomes of nations you will never visit, and certainly not for the complex constellation of feelings others choose to give you. Your sole sphere of duty lies in cultivating excellent judgment, acting virtuously in the present moment, and accepting reality with calm clarity. When we practice this selective detachment, what do we reclaim? We reclaim our time, our mental energy, and most importantly, our internal serenity. We redirect that powerful stream of anxious effort away from futile resistance and toward genuine self-mastery. This redirection is the core philosophy behind reclaiming one's life. Consider the subtle warfare waged in modern professional life, the constant pressure to achieve, the fear of falling short, the internalization of a supervisor's critique. These pressures often lead us to build elaborate emotional scaffolding around our careers, tying our intrinsic sense of worth not to personal character, but to external metrics, salary brackets, perceived status, or approval ratings. The minute that support structure is threatened by a layoff notice, a critical email, or the judgment of an industry rival, we experience a profound and disproportionate internal collapse. The Stoic challenge here is breathtaking in its simplicity. You must decouple your sense of self from these external outcomes. To be virtuous means recognizing that while you can strive with diligence, effort, and integrity in a project, the final outcome, the market fluctuation, the committee's vote, the recipient's mood, is fundamentally beyond your sovereign control. These results are data points, nothing more. They are not judgments upon your character. The journey towards true indifference is therefore a sophisticated act of self-respect. It is refusing to let the passing whims and uncontrollable machinations of the world dictate the quiet sanctity of your inner life. Instead, it demands a radical acknowledgement. I will invest my energy only where I can effect change within my own mind and my own actions. This isn't cold detachment. This is focused commitment. It is a promise to yourself that no external pressure, no harsh word, no sudden failure, no unexpected rejection will be allowed to breach the impregnable fortress of your inner peace. The indifference we seek is merely the robust recognition of what truly matters: character, intention, and wise judgment. The greatest waste, philosophically speaking, is the energy spent worrying about things that simply cannot happen, or fixing relationships where emotional effort is futile. By consciously diminishing our emotional stake in these uncontrollable realms, by practicing intellectual indifference to outcomes, we achieve a profound form of freedom. We move from being victims of circumstance to becoming deliberate navigators of our own inner world. This disciplined withdrawal allows us to reallocate ourselves to the highest pursuits: virtue, wisdom, and excellence of character. We redirect our concern from surviving the day's inevitable chaos to mastering the quiet resilience required simply to wake up each morning and choose wisely how we will think. The ultimate goal is a life lived with liberated hands, hands free not just from physical labor, but from emotional burden. To feel lightly in the world's expectations, deeply grounded in self-knowledge. To realize that true fullness comes not from maximizing external achievement, but from minimizing internal resistance to what simply asterisk is asterisk. This state of mastery is not a destination. It is the continuous, daily discipline of caring only for the things you genuinely own: your attention and your assent. We have traveled a long way from the noise. We began observing how easily we allowed the turbulent headlines of the world, the sudden criticism, the unexpected setback, the opinions of others, to dictate the rhythm of our internal peace. In previous chapters, we learned to draw firm lines in the sand of philosophy, distinguishing between what belongs solely within the citadel of our own minds and everything else that swirls chaotically outside those walls. We understood the great gift of the dichotomy, the wisdom granted by Epictetus, which taught us that true power never resides in outward action or external outcome. It rests entirely in the moment before response, in the judgment itself. This was our pivot point. The realization that an event is simply a fact, and that it is our interpretation of that fact, rather than the fact itself, which generates suffering. But understanding something intellectually is vastly different from living it. Philosophy is not merely an academic discipline. It is a practice, a strenuous, daily habituation of the soul. And this brings us to what we call the daily audit. This was never meant to be a theoretical discussion heard once and forgotten. It must become a ritual of self-confrontation. The ancient philosophers recognized that the mind, left unchecked, is an emotional accountant, prone to misallocating resources. We spend valuable emotional currency worrying about outcomes. We cannot guarantee the success of our career, the approval of a loved one, or simply how the world will judge us tomorrow. This unnecessary spending depletes our inner reserves, leaving us perpetually anxious and weary. The daily audit asks us to become forensic investigators of our own mental life. It is not about judging ourselves harshly. Rather, it is an act of profound self-compassion that insists upon truth. Every evening, as we settle into the quietude before rest, we must perform a review. We must walk back through the landscape of the day, and observe where, when, and why our attention strayed from the present moment, slipping instead into realms of unnecessary worry. We ask ourselves, where did I give my assent to an external narrative? Was there a professional interaction today, a difficult email, a subtle critique in a meeting that triggered a powerful emotional cascade in me? And more importantly, what was that initial judgment about the event? Did I immediately interpret it as proof of my failure or evidence of their disapproval? The audit demands that we pause at these moments. We must mentally isolate the raw event, the factoid itself. Then we draw a hard line and ask ourselves, without immediate defense, was this judgment necessary? Did I assign moral weight to something that was merely transient information? The goal is not to achieve bland non-feeling, but rather a clear, cold appraisal of our own emotional assumptions. This auditing process reveals a staggering pattern. We are masters of assuming responsibility for outcomes outside our sphere of influence. We take the unpredictable decisions of strangers, the political landscape, the passing mood of a peer, the economic whim, and weave them into a personal narrative of guilt or inadequacy. We act as if their actions were endorsements of our perceived shortcomings. The practice is structured by a simple internal dialogue. When we recall an episode of unnecessary anxiety, say, worrying about a presentation the next day, we run it through 3 successive questions. First, what was the objective fact? Second, what assumptions did I layer upon that fact, e.g., if this goes wrong, my life is ruined? And third, where precisely in this chain of assumption did I exert control? Was it at the initial act of assuming catastrophe? The sheer difficulty lies in its consistency. It requires us to become perpetually detached observers, like a neutral witness viewing a play unfolding on stage. We must learn that our job is simply to observe the performance, not to take up arms and participate emotionally within the drama. By committing this nightly review, we are systematically retraining the muscle of judgment itself. We teach ourselves that negative interpretations are merely hypotheses, not established truths. They are suggestions whispered by a fearful mind, lacking all inherent authority or reality. This systematic detachment gradually strips these assumed narratives of their power, rendering them harmless. The audit is thus an act of reclaiming our internal sovereignty. It allows us to move from being emotional passengers, tossed around by the currents of external events, to becoming deliberate navigators, charting a course guided only by reason and virtuous intention. When we complete this nightly inventory, when we have identified where we unnecessarily cared for things beyond our command, the judgment about other people's opinions, the worry over inevitable misfortune, we are not simply feeling better, we are fundamentally restructuring the wiring of our hearts. We are redefining freedom itself. Freedom is not the absence of difficulty. It is the quiet mastery cultivated in recognizing that regardless of what chaos swirls outside the gate, our ability to judge that chaos with clarity and acceptance remains inviolable. This steady, resilient indifference, this true Apatheia is the ultimate fortress against a life dictated by reaction. You wake up tomorrow morning having practiced this detachment, carrying forward not the heavy burden of expectation or fear, but the profound lightness of knowing where your true locus of power resides. Right here, in the quiet space between what happens and how you choose to understand it. This mastery is the art of being indifferent, not with resignation, but with radical, unshakable freedom. We have journeyed a long way. We started by identifying the exhausting grip of external opinion, the relentless pull toward headlines we could not change. We learned that our deepest suffering rarely springs from events themselves, but from the frantic, protective narratives we build around them. Over these chapters, we have refined a single, profound realization. The greatest locus of freedom does not lie in conquering the world outside us, but in mastering the fragile architecture of the mind within. This quiet mastery is the final frontier of philosophy. It is not a sudden victory, but a daily cultivation, a gentle return to equilibrium. The goal, as we have seen, has always been to find what truly belongs to us. The judgments, the intent, the initial assent to our own interpretations of reality. Everything else, the praise, the criticism, the market's whim, the actions of others, these are merely input data streams that wash over us. And yet, we have spent so much time building complex emotional fortresses around these external inputs. We treat a mere opinion as an attack on our soul. We treat a minor failure as confirmation of fundamental defectiveness. The art is not to be unfeeling. It is to be perfectly responsive. It means recognizing that the emotion itself, the panic, the righteous anger, the paralyzing shame, is the internal narrative that has been hijacked by external circumstances. The disciplined mind understands this crucial separation. The event occurs. It exists in neutral fact. Then comes the judgment. I cannot endure this. It proves my inadequacy, therefore, I must suffer. This recognition is liberation itself. It strips away the emotional authority we unknowingly granted to every transient moment of anxiety or disappointment. We begin to view life not as a chaotic onslaught of demands, but as a continuous series of natural data points requiring sober assessment. The task shifts from desperately trying to control outcome, a struggle always fought against the immovable nature of existence, to rigorously controlling our internal participation in those outcomes. Think back to that moment, the subtle pivot point between the external stimulus and your immediate reaction. That sliver of time is not just a pause. It is the single greatest power available to you. It is the space where choice resides. In that space, we are trained to withhold assent. We refuse the automatic, knee-jerk interpretation, the story our fear automatically writes about the situation. This process demands an almost radical indifference, but let us reiterate what this truly means. It is not resignation. It is precision. It is treating external outcomes with a professional detachment, understanding that success and failure are simply results, neither of which should determine your inherent value or guide your next action. You execute the virtuous action because it is correct. You do not execute it to gain validation or avoid criticism. The quiet mastery we speak of today is therefore characterized by internal fluidity. It means being like water, adapting perfectly to whatever container or crisis is placed before you, yet retaining its essential self. When life batters you with misfortune, the trained mind does not resist the force. It acknowledges the pressure, adapts its form without compromising its core integrity. The pain is experienced, but it does not become a defining narrative. And what of those moments that feel overwhelming, the cumulative weight of modern expectations, the perfect career trajectory, the flawless online persona, the illusion of continuous upward momentum? These pressures are fueled by our persistent belief that external validation equals internal peace. They make us forget that the ultimate measure of self-worth is entirely contained within your ability to judge reality correctly. Moment after painstaking moment, we must continuously dismantle the idols we have constructed, the idol of success, the idol of approval, the idol of stability. These are not external realities. They are merely judgments we have elevated to divine status. And when those perceived pillars crumble, when the job changes hands, or the friendship fades, or the election swings wildly, we must remember where our true ground was always laid. Our ground is internal. It is in the consistent practice of distinguishing between what is truly up to us and accepting everything else as beyond the boundaries of our personal will. We are accountable only for the quality of our intention, the consistency of our virtue, and the clarity of our judgment when faced with unavoidable suffering. The rest must be released. To live with liberated hands is to understand that true power is found in the exquisite art of letting go of desired outcomes, letting go of preemptive anxieties, and most importantly, letting go of the need for external confirmation. It is finding a settled repose amidst the swirling tempest, a calm derived not from circumstance, but from perfect self-possession. This is the enduring peace that wisdom offers, the unwavering knowledge that no matter what happens out there, within you, you remain